arms and Western support, data, instructors, all these things, training, he would be able to get the upper hand. And in this illusion, he denounced the deal. And before that, as a gesture of goodwill, we withdrew forces from big territory in the north of Ukraine, including Kiev. Now they present it as a big victory for Ukraine, but they had nothing to do with it. It was our own gesture of goodwill in the spirit of negotiations, which were proceeding quite successfully at this moment. So this was rejected. Several other mediation attempts were rejected. And so far, we see absolutely no willingness of the West to engage in meaningful negotiations. And Zelensky regime is doomed, of course. It's a matter of time. I don't know unfortunately, how many more Ukrainians will die because of this meat grinder that Zelensky is throwing them into. The biggest change that we see right now is not even in the fact that militarily Russia is gaining the upper hand. The problem is in the support of Ukrainian society, or I would put it in the lack of support of Ukrainian society, because the most notorious video reels in Ukrainian social media are those of forced conscription. So people in military and military uniform are really conducting a manhunt, forcing these conscripts to go and to fight. Can you imagine what will be the motivation of these people, first of all, to fight? Of course, they surrender. Of course, they try to avoid being killed. But the problem with them is most of them want to surrender, and many of them surrender. But there are detachments, the nationalist detachments, who are shooting in their backs, and they don't let them surrender. They push them to fight, and that's how they get killed. And the casualties are incredible, Ukrainian side. So this is mad, and of course Zelensky could have easily stopped it if he cared a little bit about his country and his countrymen, but he has betrayed his country long ago, and he hasn't fulfilled a single electoral promise of how he was elected in 2019. So the situation is now very bad, because no matter how many arms and what kind of arms the West is ready to supply, first of all, it will not change the situation on the battlefield militarily. Secondly, Ukraine simply starts to lack the manpower, and this is something that is hard to compensate. Of course, there are crazy ideas that we hear from France, from some others, that there should be troops on the ground. But everybody understands the implications, that it will be direct conflict between Russia and NATO. And I think there are still a lot of politicians in the West that even at that time understand the fallout of such possible decisions. So we hope that this scenario will be avoided. And there is nothing else that Ukraine can do at this moment. There is steady advancement of Russian troops, and we do it meticulously. We save manpower, we save civilian population, we organize only precision strikes at the objects that are linked to military infrastructure or to military potential of the Kiev regime. And it looks like we are quite successful in this. I wouldn't, of course, recommend to celebrate at this point, but step by step, I think that we are moving in the direction of the total collapse of Ukrainian defense. And it might be a matter of weeks or months when we will see the change on the battlefield. Again, regardless of all the money that is being given by the US and by the others, they just can't change the dynamics and the whole situation on the ground. I think that most military experts, at least honest military experts, they admit that this is a gruesome reality that Ukraine is now facing as a result of Zelensky's policies.
Yeah, no, I mean, all those are great points. And I was wondering, maybe just to follow up, if you could speak on, given that it looks like the summer is going to be a very difficult one for Ukraine, as you said, there's already massive losses. There's just so much penetration that Russia is moving through on that front line. They're moving it forward. They're advancing, massive losses for Ukraine. Do you see collapse and surrender as the only opportunity then for a future diplomatic solution? Because I don't think we can predict exactly what will happen in the conflict, but given that you said in the beginning that there really isn't any diplomatic solution that can be worked out right now, do you see collapse on the Ukrainian side and of course on the NATO side as the only possible avenue for such a thing?
We were quite open from the outset, saying that we would be ready to see the goals of our special military operation to be implemented in a peaceful and diplomatic way. And we're still in this position. Because these goals, they were not formulated out of the blue, and because of the fact that we want to have a fight with Ukraine. We are absolutely not happy about this, because Ukrainians are brotherly people to us and still are, and we hope that we will be brotherly people after this operation will be over. So these aims are very simple, and they are aimed at returning to the previous situation when Ukraine was not a threat to Russia, when Ukraine was a good neighbor, a peace-loving neighbor, when Ukraine was respecting the rights of Russian-speaking population, which is the majority of population of Ukraine, whether someone likes it or not. We also couldn't tolerate the growing Nazification of Ukraine, which accelerated very much after the Maidan coup in 2014. And this is something that we can't put up with, and this is one of the aims of our special military operation. As for demilitarization, I think that this aim is more or less fulfilled, because Ukraine doesn't have the arms of its own. It can fight only with the arms that is provided by the West. So if there is a wise personality in the West who would say that, okay, let's come back to this diplomatic path, and we would be ready to, and we would be able to implement these goals that I mentioned through diplomatic means, I don't think that the diplomacy has no chance in this regard. But so far, unfortunately, it's not looking like this, both from the part of the West and from the part of the Kiev regime. And Kiev regime, of course, is absolutely not independent. It's following the orders from the West and the instructions. And there is also one more situation that one needs to take account of. It's the fact that the leader of the Kiev regime will lack legitimacy after the 20th of May. He was supposed to hold an elections, but of course he was very much afraid not to get enough support to be re-elected. And that's why he just canceled the elections against the constitution. And he also is so afraid of losing, because his ratings are one-digit figure, I think, in Ukraine right now. So he even skipped the procedure of asking Constitutional Court on its advice what he should do. That's why not only us, but a lot of people in his own country are now saying that Zelensky regime will lose any credibility and legitimacy after the 20th of May. And then the question arises, with whom should we conduct theoretically negotiations, even if his regime would be ready to conduct these negotiations, which is not the case. You know that he has a decree which forbids him to engage in any negotiations with Russia. Okay, if he changes his mind, he's not legitimate anymore. And the next president who would come, as it already happened several times in Ukrainian history, would say that he is not bound by any obligations that his predecessor took. So this is also a factor. I wouldn't say that this is the dominating factor, but this is something that one should bear in mind. And this makes the chances of diplomatic process right now very slim, frankly. That's why we have to solve the goals, to implement the tasks of our special military operation on the battlefield, on the ground, and hopefully we will advance much more during summer and autumn, and then there will be quite another reality for any efforts that might be taken in this regard diplomatically.
Now, I wanted to use our remaining time to speak about this contrast. You know, we had Antony Blinken, the so-called top diplomat of the United States, the Secretary of State in Kiev, talking about how $400 million more worth of arms will be a game changer for Zelensky and Ukraine. He's rocking and rolling in Kiev at bars, having a great time. And then you have, on the other side, you have Vladimir Putin in China right now, meeting with Xi Jinping. And one of the first things that came out of that in the lead up to the meeting was China coming out and being very forthright and saying there will be no talks about a solution regarding the Ukraine crisis without Russia. They will not participate in Zelensky's peace initiative. So could you talk about the contrast here? Maybe if you would comment on Russia and China's role, both at the United Nations and globally in this moment, versus how the United States is doing things from a perspective of a diplomat like yourself.
Well, United States has